to all those questions and more in another fascinating episode for you. Hello and welcome to Palace Confidential. I'm Jo Elvin, and back this week to talk about the big royal stories is the Mail on Sunday's editor-at-large Charlotte Griffiths and the Daily Mail's diary editor Richard Eden. Welcome to you both. Right, before we get into it, I just want to point out something, that at the time of recording, we have 240. Please do click that subscribe button. It costs nothing, but guarantees you will see each new episode of the show. Back to business. Richard, the King, has been back to business, back out and about. What's he doing?
Oh my goodness. I mean, the King has been, it's as if, you know, he was a young, healthy monarch, but here out and about a lot. People might have seen the image. You know, there are literally thousands of guests there. He's meeting as many of them as he can, shaking hands. And that was a day, I think he actually had some cancer treatment later that day. And that wasn't his only engagement that day. The whole morning he'd been, such as the Royal Windsor Horse Show, which was his mother's favourite event of the year. People might remember her sort of sitting there watching a parade of cows going past and being really excited.
I don't remember that. It doesn't seem like something, you know, I've seen a few cows, none of them that memorable.
It was there were lovely images of King Charles attending.
Formal revisiting of Coronation Day later in the week, which she was there for.
They do seem to have found this kind of
helmets in it, and it's just really cosy, and it's not royal, and it's not actually that smart, although it's a nice big house. I wouldn't say no, but you know, it's just where she feels truly, truly at home, and she can just relax and unwind and possibly have a gin and tonic, maybe even a cigarette, who knows?
I bet our Rebecca English has had a tour of the King's determination to just keep on carrying on throughout his treatment.
How active his father is being. You know, it's such an interesting subject, and you know yourself from dealing with friends or family that, you know, when someone has cancer, it very much kind of is up to them what they want to undertake. And in the case of the King, he's clearly determined to do as much as possible, and I think that does make William apprehensive, as any son would be. I think, you know, he's kind of urged him to take it easy. And we also heard from Queen Camilla. She'd said at an event, she'd said, oh, I'm been trying to sort of hold him back a bit. You know, said it in a jokey way, but I think she kind of meant that, really.
But I think that probably is a legitimate concern, isn't it? That will he listen to good advice for his own health or not?
I'm certain you've got doctors have said to him, take it easy, and friends and officials will do too. But you know, if the King wants to do something, he will do it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Camilla said he was like a caged lion, which I thought was quite a good description. But I heard that aides are desperately trying to hold him back. And especially this summer, he's dying to go to every single event going, because being outside at summer events really suits his treatment, which it basically he just needs to be in the open air.
Right.
So he's, you know, he wants to go to Ascot for 5 days, you know, and his aides are saying, no, no, no. You know, 1 day, maybe 2, you know, take it in stages, but he's, you know, he's chomping at the bit.
But he is, you know, he's shaking hands with a lot of people, like he was at the, you know, the garden party, and that's a lot of germs, and for someone whose immunity will be low, it is worrying.
But what's he trying to prove? That's the question I want to know. Why is he so desperate to go hell for leather this summer? Is it because he's just been cooped up, or is it because he wants to really cement
it's one of those things, isn't it? When you are dealing with that diagnosis, you want to grip onto all semblance of normality, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of that, but I think that there's also a little bit of, you know, it's the Carolian era, and he really wants to, he hasn't been able to sort of start that, and he really wants to be seen so he can be in the history books, I think.
Now, the article in the Sunday Times, Charlotte, also threw up something that the experts are calling the unexpected positive consequences of Charles's diagnosis. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, in the Sunday Times, they said that it's been really good for Camilla's reputation, because she was always characterised as quite work shy, but actually she's been bossing it. One person said she was bossing it behind the scenes. Camilla's bossing it. And, you know, actually people expected her to be, I suppose, the public, because of this narrative that she's lazy and needs lots of rest, thought that she was going to be lazy, but she hasn't been at all. And, you know, she's been going hell for leather as well. She turns up at numerous events. She's basically done the work of two very senior royals, the most senior royals, while Charles has been ill. And I think it's sort of been her duty, and she's been very dutiful. And so this whole narrative that we've been spun out since the 80s turns out not to be true. She's a hard worker.
I mean, come on, you know, the Queen is 76, you know, people retire in this country at 60 or 65, you know, and there she is having to undertake even more work. So we need to give her a break.
And do you think that with Charles as well, though, has this diagnosis, has his determination to be front and centre and public facing, has it put him more on a level of the royal subjects rather than this lofty royal? Is he seen as more human, which has been a boost for him?
Well, I've written in my newsletter this week, and it's an article going on Mail Plus, is how in a way it's given him a new energy, the cancer, bizarrely, because it's that, you know, this is a man who's waited decades to get the big job, and now he wants to really make the most of it. And the fact he's been struck by cancer has made him all the more determined to get out there and do it. So it's a sort of frantic energy in many ways.
Yeah, but the piece also touched on the fact it's allowed him to connect with people, because we've all been touched by cancer and everyone's knows somebody who's had cancer, so it's just allowed him to really connect with people and brought him down a little bit to our level. You know, we're all human basically. And
have something that is genuinely heartfelt to talk about with people. Yeah,
totally.
It's interesting, isn't it? Richard, something we have talked about before on this programme are the huge amounts of royal patronages that are still unresolved since the death of the Queen and Prince Philip. But we have seen some movement on that this week. And just quickly, can you explain royal patronages to people who might not know?
Well, essentially, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were royal patrons of literally hundreds of organisations, and it means a lot. You know, it's for charities, it's for organisations that do good works, and some of them are the Royal Society, or others they just have their royal patron. And people say it makes a big difference in terms of fundraising, prestige, and so they weren't happy that they'd been left without one. And now it's been announced, you know, after a year, the King's been on the throne, that he has taken it's a couple of hundred more of his patronages, and that will make a big difference to all those organisations.
A huge relief, I can imagine.
I think a big relief, because they feared, you know, we've had a lot of talk about slimming down the monarchy and whether that means that there would be hundreds of organisations that would have no royal patron. You know, they might have to look abroad, maybe to, you know, royals in California or Kardashians or other sort of celebrities.
Oh, don't make that joke. You will not live through the comments from that Kardashian royal joke. But does that mean that the King possibly has 200 plus more engagements to try and fit in to give face time to these charities and other organisations?
It does change the nature of things. In a way, it's an admission that sort of idea of the slimmed down monarchy, in my opinion, certainly doesn't really work. And the fact he's taken on so many shows that the King he understands the importance of that connection. And I hope in his time Prince William will do as well. Because otherwise, you know, what's the point of the royal family? You know, they are there to
Richard, you're not supposed to ask that question.
They're there to encourage good causes and that type of thing. And so, you know, to have that patron makes a lot of difference to them, and there'll be a lot of relief all round.
Do you think, Charlotte, that we can expect more change in the way these patronages are dealt with, as Richard alludes to, when William takes the throne?
I think so. I think he's going to cut them right back, to be honest, because what William wants to do is care a lot about a few causes rather than spreading himself too thin. He dreads going around the country and cutting ribbons for the rest of his life because he wants to connect with people. He doesn't want to just be symbolic at an event for 5 minutes. You know, dare I say, a little bit like Princess Anne, who we love, but gosh, she gets through a lot of events, doesn't she? You know, every day, it's sometimes 10, 15.
But, and while that's a noble principle of William's, surely a lot of these charities and other organisations are quite happy with their 5 minutes of ribbon cutting if it gives that such a boost.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's what you said as well. And it's so important to them. But, you know, I think for William, he just finds that too daunting. He's got a huge family of his own. He's got 3 kids. He really cares about causes. And what if he ends up neglecting some of his causes, such as homelessness and the environment? You know, they take up a huge amount of his time. Currently, the Duchy of Cornwall takes up a lot of his time. So I think it's a noble aim. I know what you mean, though, because everyone wants to say they've got, you know, a royal's been through their doors, but it can't continue. It's quite an unsustainable way to live one's life, actually, if you're a royal.
Well, hopefully it will change, you know, when Prince William becomes king, that it was the same with Charles, that when he was Prince of Wales, he could get involved in, you know, big causes, whether it's environment or organic food or architecture. But being king is different. That's when you do need to be patron and more. So I think hopefully it's just a reflection of the fact that William is Prince of Wales, and he'll see that his role needs to change as well.
Watch this space. Well, we have so much more to come, including all the details of Harry's revealing trip to London. But before then, let's have a couple of your comments. And we'll start with the most important royal topic from last week. That's right, how Richard and Rebecca coordinated their outfits. Everybody noticed, like this from Michelle Smith, who said, "I love that Richard's tie matches Rebecca's dress." They had a chat beforehand, didn't you? Perhaps they could coordinate more often. Thoughts on that?
Well, we didn't organise it beforehand. It was just a coincidence. But maybe we should in the future. Good idea.
All right, we'll have a discussion. There'll be a meeting. Well, sticking with outfits, another Michelle Long, had this to say after we mentioned the late Queen's Second World War overalls. "I rewound to take another look at Queen Elizabeth in her ambulance uniform, and you're all wrong. She actually made that dull thing look elegant and fashionable." I quite agree, actually. While Grand Duchess Anaya had this to say about the Duchess of Sussex's no-show in London. "How ironic that Meghan has a death grip on her British title but doesn't wish to step a foot back into the UK ever again. Ouch." Well, many of you took issue with comments from Rebecca about Prince Harry founding the Invictus Games. Some polite, some a little bit less so, I have to say, like Gail Marshall, who wrote, "Rebecca, why does everyone keep insinuating that Harry did this Invictus thing all by himself?" Well, Rebecca isn't here today because she is spending the day with the Prince of Wales in Cornwall. And she was at a royal garden party at Buckingham Palace yesterday. She does have quite the life, doesn't she? Well, we're all just sitting here in this fake palace. She did, however, send us this message to answer all of those who questioned last week's Invictus discussion.
Now, I think it's important to point out that when you report on the royal family, you should do it without fear or favour. If there's something to praise, you should praise it. And equally, if there's something particularly egregious, you should not be afraid to point that out either. Now, when it comes to Invictus, I think it's important to stress that back in 2013, I was with Prince Harry in Colorado in the United States when he was introduced to the Warriors game, a brilliant, very similar concept out there. And he spoke to a group of journalists afterwards, including myself, and said he was determined to bring that same concept back to the UK and get it off the ground. Now, I'll be honest, at the time, I thought it might have been a bit hot air, Harry being very over and emotional and kind of speaking from the heart. But to be fair, he absolutely threw himself into it when he got back. He did that within the confines of the Royal Foundation that he was involved with the then Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, and he did get things off the ground in part using funds from that Royal Foundation. But everybody within the royal household at the time absolutely acknowledged that this was Harry's passion project and he was left to pursue it. And when the Invictus Games launched in 2014, the King, I should say the then Prince of Wales, and the Duke of Cambridge very much came proudly to support him, but as spectators, not founders.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for all your comments. We do love receiving them. Please do try and keep them civil if we manage to be polite on the show. It's not so much to ask, is it? I'm sure you can in your comments. Thank you so much. Now, let's bring my panel back now, as a lot of you were also writing in the comments thinking that Rebecca called Harry and Meghan's trip to Africa a royal tour. Well, I think she actually said quasi-royal tour. Richard, we know it isn't a royal tour, but the point that has been made that, you know, some experts think that they're trying to make it look like a royal tour.
Well, I think it very much is a quasi-royal tour in the sense that you know, they've been invited there, as Prince Harry stressed, by the Chief of the Defence Staff. You know, it's a formal invitation. Obviously, they're going to have very good security there. We'll learn more about their itinerary when it's released, but it will be a full programme of engagements. We know that it's connected with the Invictus Games and Nigeria's plans to become more involved in that. So it will very much have the feel of a royal tour, even if they are not working royals anymore.
What do you make of it, Charlotte? Because obviously Harry left being part of the working royal family to step away from the difficulties of royal duties, you know, press intrusion, etc. But here it looks like he's trying to copy working royal life.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's one reason and one reason only, and it's money, because he's going to lose all these Netflix deals, all these, you know, these big deals he's done, you know, the American Riviera Orchard. God, it's still so hard to say. After all this time, it's so uncatchy. But, you know, all that stuff is all associated with the fact he's royal. And if he disappears off from royal life, then we're not going to think of him as a royal. He'll start slipping down the celebrity A-list ladder in Hollywood. So he's got to try and keep up this image that he is a royal on a royal tour. But we all know, well, at least here in the UK, I call it the pseudo-royal tour. You know, it's not a real royal tour. And they may wave, you know, on the steps here and there, but it's not the same. It's not official.
But also, Richard, without the official diplomatic element to his trip, do these trips just risk looking like you're taking the paparazzi on holiday with you?
I think they do, but they were invited, you know, by the Nigerian government, so that gives it that sort of formal stamp. But it's not a trip that's been authorised by the British government or anything like that. So it's kind of whatever happens is up to Nigeria and Harry and Meghan. But it's the first one they've conducted like this, and it will obviously encourage comparisons with proper royal trips, and I look forward to seeing how it goes.
Indeed. Well, Charlotte, let's rewind a little bit. We know Harry's on his way right now, but to this week's visit to the UK, what was he doing here?
Well, he went to St Paul's Cathedral, where he did wave to the crowds at the top of the stairs, which I thought was quite a royal moment, because he was hosting a 10-year anniversary service to mark 10 years since the inception of the Invictus Games. And, you know, he was visiting one or two friends. It doesn't seem like he saw many friends and family. And he saw his uncle and his aunt on Diana's side, Earl Spencer. And, you know, that was pretty much it, because he wasn't at the Buckingham Palace garden party.
No, and Richard, after the inevitable will they, won't they, of whether or not Harry would meet with the King, it was confirmed that he would not meet his father. And why do you think that was?
Well, it did come as a surprise to some, because last weekend there were lots of reports, front-page reports, that, you know, Harry was going to meet his father.
Except on the Mail, we will.
Exactly,
yes.
Certainly not in the Daily Mail.
Yeah.
And then, so it became slightly embarrassing when Harry's spokesman put out the statement saying that, you know, his father couldn't find time, and there was a bit of an edge to that statement.
Is that a weird thing to do, to make an official announcement in that way?
Well, they said they were just addressing, because they've had so many questions about it. They were addressing that directly. Otherwise, they may have felt that it would overshadow the trip completely. But it is very striking indeed.
Charlotte, we know the King's very busy. We've been discussing it not 10 minutes ago, and they're not a typical family. But in a rare week when they're in the same country, 2 miles apart, it speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It does speak volumes. The fact that he had 8,000 people at the Buckingham Palace garden party and there wasn't room for one more is really sad. Actually, this is the first time I've been truly, truly saddened by that dispute between them, because, of course, any king can make 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour for his son. He's the King of England. He calls the shots on every level. But the time just wasn't available. And also, William was around the corner in Windsor doing an investiture. There was no time for his brother. I mean, that's slightly more predictable. But just to think of them all in the same sort of region of, you know, West London, more or less, and yeah, they didn't see each other. It's really, really sad, actually, I think.
Now, Richard, we talked earlier about the unexpected positive consequences of Charles's cancer diagnosis, while your fellow Royal Richard Kay, wrote this week that the King's illness has, if anything, added to the estrangement between Charles and Harry. Why do you think he would say that?
No, it's an interesting point that some have made, and I've written about it in my newsletter this week. And I think it's the fact now that the King just doesn't want distractions. He's become even more focused on getting his work done.
His son's a distraction.
Yeah, I mean, people I spoke to this week
That's
said
awkward.
he just brings unhappiness, he brings drama. I mean, remember the conversations we've had in this programme before where we were talking about the King's birthday? And that became a whole drama that they were, from California, we were getting statements about Harry was going to be speaking to his father on the phone, and then we heard all the contents of that conversation that Meghan had joined in and this sort of thing after. So the King knows that, everything he says basically will leak out one way or another. And, for someone who is just determined to get on with the job, that's very problematic.
Yeah.
I have this theory too, back to the point about Nigeria, that if Charles was to meet Harry, say yesterday, and then the very next day he flew to Nigeria, that's quite a close association, and it's almost like giving the royal seal of approval to that Nigeria trip, I think.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
And there's no way Charles wants to have anything to do with Nigeria, because he has no idea what Meghan and Harry are going to say, how they're going to act. The royal family do not approve that message, whatever it is. And if he saw Harry, it's just too close an association, I think.
And also, while this was all unfurling, Charlotte, the palace announced a big engagement between the King and William. What is it, and what do you make of the timing of that?
Yeah, so they're going to do a joint engagement on Tuesday next week, because William's being made Colonel of the Army Air Corps. And I just thought the timing of the announcement, yeah, sure, they had to announce it this week, that's true. But the fact they announced it at 9 p.m, just at the height of all the speculation about whether Harry and Charles were going to see each other, and we just found out that they weren't. And it was, building and building, and then they just cut it all back and just said, by the way, Charles and William are going to do an engagement next week. William's going to be the head of this very important part of the army, and it really stopped everyone dead in their tracks and thought, oh gosh, this is actually war here, because this is the first time the royal family have really pushed back quite hard on Harry in a public way as best they can, because they can't give out statements like Harry did saying my dad doesn't have time for me. They couldn't do that, but they did do this, and it was a serious gesture, I think, and it was very pointed and definitely deliberate, that timing.
I mean, let's be clear. I mean, that appointment of Colonel-in-Chief, which the King has handed over to Prince William of the Army Air Corps, will really hurt Prince Harry. It will be very painful, because Harry served with the Army Air Corps himself when he was in Afghanistan. He was the helicopter pilot. And it is a role that, had he stuck with the royal family, quite possibly would have been handed to him. So to have that announced, and particularly at the time when Harry's coming here, does seem very pointed and will be very painful.
A kick in the teeth, I'd say.
It really is as dramatic as all those old sort of like Dallas-style soap operas sometimes, isn't it? Where do Charles and Harry go from here? Is this at all reparable?
Well, the key point that I made in my newsletter is it's about essentially apologising. That there can't be any kind of reconciliation until Harry and Meghan apologise for all the hurt they've caused and everything they've done. And there's no sign of that. Quite the opposite. In private, they're saying that they're still owed an apology. So until that's overcome, how can you have any kind of rapprochement?
I think Harry's got one card to play. I'm just going to put this out there. If Harry came over with the children, there's no way that Charles could refuse a meeting, because it would just look terrible. And also, I think he genuinely really wants to meet his grandchildren. I think they've only seen each other once or twice in their lives. So that's what, if Harry really wants to see his dad, I suggest he brings his children over.
But from what we hear, Meghan is sort of refusing to come to Britain on the basis that there's a security problem. This is that Harry took the British government to court, that security wasn't provided, and lost that case. And so it's unsafe to bring them. That's the sort of theory. So
there's no way that if say he brought the kids to Buckingham Palace, say, I mean, those are going to be the most secure children on the planet, and the King's not going to let his grandchildren come to harm's way. I wouldn't be surprised if some special measures were put in to encourage that notion.
No, I mean, it's ridiculous. And Meghan is currently flying to Nigeria, which is a dangerous country in comparison with Britain.
Interesting stuff. It really is. Now, a lot of Palace viewers might not know that our Charlotte is very well acquainted with Harry's old chums, the old friend group. Any whispers in there of him seeing anybody?
No, he saw Mark Dyer, who is probably his last remaining close friend in London, I'd say, of the old school variety. And Mark Dyer is his sort of second father, godfather / best friend / advisor. I mean, in lieu of Charles, I'd say he's got Mark Dyer. He's a kind of fatherly figure. And then that's pretty much it, because the Van Strapanzis he was very close with. But this week, Tom Van Strapanzi has been in communication with William, who's sort of more his best friend.
That was my next question, because surely the brothers have a lot of friends in common, so that makes that very awkward for that friend group, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it's beyond awkward. I mean, most of them have actually been cut off, and they've actually ended up choosing William. The Van Strapanzis is a really good example, because William's giving Tom Van Strapanzi's mum, Claire Van Strapanzi, an MBE, and you know, that sort of put the Van Strapanzis in William's camp. And I'd say probably one of the last remaining joint friends they had was Tom Van Strapanzi. But anyway, they're over on Team William now. And then there's Mark Dyer. But there's no one else. Nicky Scott from the Netflix documentary, he wasn't at the St Paul's Cathedral service. So it's really sad. And there's no Princess Eugenie. He was really good friends with Princess Eugenie. She wasn't there. That whole circle's just been cut off, really.
Well, in any case, well done for saying Van Strapanzi so many times so correctly. That was really well
just
done.
Van for short.
Yeah.
In the future.
No, I like it. It sounds great. Richard, you also reported that Harry's had a legal setback in the US this week.
Yes, this is connected to a different charity, very good charity, Centre Barley, that Harry co-founded to help. It was African children orphaned because of the AIDS crisis. So it's a very good charity, but he's been trying to trademark various names in the USA, and they've all been rejected. All the applications have been rejected in quite a scathing kind of way by the authorities in the USA, that just, you know, not adequate, you haven't given enough information. It would seem very kind of shoddy work. And also, unfortunately, it seems like the American branch of the charity hasn't been doing so well. Their donations to Centre Barley have halved over the past year. And given that Harry and Meghan are based in California, it's really striking. You would have thought that the fact they're there with all these rich friends and everything, that should boost donations, but that hasn't happened. So hopefully maybe that will in the future, because it is a charity that does a lot of good work.
Indeed. Now, that's enough about one of the royal family's black sheep. On to another one. Charlotte, Prince Andrew. His living arrangements are back in the news. What can you tell us?
So he's in Royal Lodge, and part of the deal of him remaining in Royal Lodge is that he upkeeps the house. And last week, some photos came out which revealed it's in basically a state of disrepair. I mean, they can't even put a lick of paint on the outside walls, and there are cracks in the brickwork. So it's looking very, very shoddy indeed. And given that he sort of stayed put and just refused to leave when he was encouraged to do so,
and hasn't had that much to do.
And hasn't had that much to do. But part of the deal is, so he's got an ironclad 75-year lease, but the deal is he's got to pay the upkeep. He pays something like £250 a week or a month rent, but the upkeep is huge. It's astronomical, because it's a massive 30-room place. It's about £400,000, I think. And he doesn't have £400,000 because he's just paid a very expensive £12 million payout to a certain young Virginia Roberts. So it seems like he's not keeping his end of the bargain. Now, this could be Charles's moment to say, right, well, your lease is invalid then, you're out after all. And the rumour is that they want Kate and William to move in there, because it's this huge regal house and it's kind of fit for a king or a king in waiting. And then he probably would get Frogmore Cottage. But right. Andrew doesn't think Frogmore Cottage is big enough or grand enough for him. But, you know, his house is basically falling apart.
Gosh, I mean, Richard, is this another royal headache for the king that he doesn't need right now, or is it, as Charlotte might suggest, playing into his hands?
Well, friends of Andrew that I've spoken to, and there are still some, they say this is kind of just propaganda, that actually, you know, it's a beautifully kept house, and it was just one or two photos of a huge property, and it's a bit shabby in one or two places. You know, come on, you can make any of our houses look
bits of it that Andrew hasn't seen in 5 years. Is that what it is?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I heard that one too. I'm not convinced.
They say actually it's very smart, but it does emphasise the problem that the king has with his brother. That, you know, he's there, he's in this. Let's face it, you know, it is a palace. What does he do with him? But who else would be there? I mean, honestly, Prince William is not itching to move to Royal Lodge with his family, and then you'd have all the headlines about millions being spent on Prince William's new home.
True.
You know, in many ways, it suits William and Catherine if their uncle Andrew is there and kind of gets the blame or whatever. So I don't think it's a situation that's going to be resolved in any great hurry.
The problem is that Andrew views himself as a very grandiose, important part of the royal family, but he's just not anymore. So he says, this is fit for a king, and I'm basically king. But he's not, you know, and until he can deflate his own ego and his sense of proportion within the royal family, I don't think they're going to be able to evict him from this place.
No, but it's something that needs to be addressed by the king, because the position of Royal Lodge, it can't just be let out on the private market because it's so close to Windsor Castle.
Right.
That would be a security nightmare.
Why is it that you think there are so many people who have that view that you've just expressed about Andrew, that he has that feeling of like he's ordained as royal, he has the right to be there. Why does that persist? That
Well, because it's true.
I don't think until the Queen died, anyone's ever told him anything otherwise. You know, the Queen was always massaging his ego, saying how wonderful and her precious son was, and nobody's dared tell him no for years until recently.
That must be a nice bubble to live in, mustn't it?
It's
Anyway.
surely popped now.
But you know what time it is now, don't you? It's time for the Princess Anne section of the show.
Good.
I feel like it needs its own little musical interlude, but until then, I'll just sort of like herald it thus. But Charlotte, she's been in Canada. Doing
Yes.
what?
First of all, she donned a naval uniform. She looks very good in a naval uniform, so she was looking very regal and sort of power dressing. I loved it, and I know all the fans of Princess Anne will love seeing her. She was launching a boat because she is Commodore-in-Chief, Honorary Commodore-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. So she was doing that, and I think she squeezed in another couple of engagements, but she flew straight back to the UK again after 2 days. She didn't even give it a week.
She really does do that, doesn't she? Why was it such a whistle-stop trip, Richard?
Oh, I think just because it's no-nonsense Anne. She's got her engagements to carry out, she does them, and then, you know, wants to get home and see the horses again. But we should say it's been an important week for Princess Anne in the sense that it was reported that of all the royal engagements so far this year, a third of them have been carried out by Princess Anne.
Nobody is surprised by that fact, are they, really, at this point?
You know, but for a woman in her 70s, you know, it's a very striking figure. I mean, obviously that's because Prince William hasn't been doing so much because of his wife's illness. We've got no Catherine. There aren't many royals carrying out engagements at the moment.
She must roll her eyes so far back in her head when she hears, you know, people like Meghan talking about the gruelling Australian schedule, etc., etc. She must.
Yes, I mean, Meghan famously in Fiji wrapped up an event after 8 minutes. Can you imagine what Princess Anne said, oh no, I don't like this, it's a bit overwhelming. So she just wrapped it up. I mean, Anne would never do that. You know, yeah.
Long live Anne. Well, royal watchers were delighted to see the King back at Royal Windsor Horse Show a few days ago, and to celebrate, here are some of our favourite pictures of the event over the years. Hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. Now, a reminder again, if you don't subscribe to our channel, please do, and help us to get over that 250,000 mark. We can open a bottle of champagne or two. Thanks to Richard and Charlotte and to you for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.